Good afternoon. Dear Hire, all of our dear family and dear friends. As Simon mentioned, I'm Kurajian, George and Vicky's middle child. My brother, I'm actually up here representing, first of all, my mother Vicky, my brother George, my sister Mary, our Uncle Anna, and our entire family. First of all, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for being here today to celebrate our dad's amazing life. We would also like to thank all of our friends and family who have reached out these last few days with beautiful emails, texts, and phone calls. To our friends who brought food to Mom's house, thank you. The meals were very delicious. A special thanks to Dear Hire, the deacons, the choir, the organist, Mr. Kurajian and his whole group. Also a special thanks to our family and friends who traveled quite a distance to be with us today. It's just wonderful, greatly appreciated by all of us. If my dad was up here giving this talk, he would mention that his life as a college professor, he would need 50 minutes, the length of an average college lecture. Please do not worry, I will only be up here a few minutes, as I'm not an experienced public speaker by any means, as you can probably already tell. But I did want to say a few words about our one-of-a-kind father. Dad would always talk about what an incredible life he lived. He was born in 1926 to Masrob and Kurajian, to beautiful, loving parents, and later, beautiful and loving grandparents. His parents instilled in him love, kindness, generosity, love of education, love of our beautiful church, and love of this country, which my grandfather, by the way, called heaven on earth, as he was a survivor of the Armenian genocide. Those values would stay with Dad his entire life. Throughout Dad's life, he achieved everything he had dreamed of. First of all, being a loving and awesome son, then marrying the woman of his dreams, our beautiful mother, Vicky. Their 60 years together were filled with love, caring, and devotion. Myself, George, and Mary never once heard them argue, and that is the absolute truth. An amazing marriage. He was also the most incredible father any child could ever dream of. He showered all three of us with love constantly and was there for us at every turn. I know George and I were still consulting him for advice, even near the very end of his life. As George knows, like I know, he always had the right answer. He was not only our father, but our most devoted friend. Next in his life, his wish of becoming a grandfather. That wish was granted 5 beautiful times. He treasured each grandchild and had his own special and unique relationship, connection with each one of them. All the grandchildren will carry with them forever what lessons Grandpa taught them. How he was so devoted to us, his family, and still was able to accomplish a storied professional life is still a mystery to me. A lot of you joining us here today to celebrate my dad's life may only know my dad personally, and may not know the extent of his professional life, he touched and greatly influenced thousands of lives. We could never count how many times us three kids were told not only that we had the kindest father with that infectious smile, but also the smartest. Quite honestly, for me, his worldwide reputation in the engineering field did not click in until I was 16 years old. My mom, my sister, and I, unfortunately my brother had just started school in Ann Arbor and couldn't join us, but we joined our dad as he was a main speaker at a huge international conference in London, England. As the speech ended in an auditorium with about 2,000 to 3,000 people, I attempted to get out of my chair and walk up to congratulate him. It was an impossible task, as the center aisle filled immediately with hundreds of engineers. They were hoping just for a chance to say a few words to him. I snuck up a side aisle as I needed to hear what was being said to my dad. It was engineers from literally all over the world that would say things like, "I've been reading your publications for years, just wanted to shake your hand." Or they'd come from a certain faraway country and just wanted to have a chance to say a few words to him. This went on for about 2 hours. I was totally blown away. It was then that I finally realized that he was not only a superstar father, but a superstar in the international engineering community. My final thought. Our father's favorite playwright character was Cyrano de Bergerac. It is a very, very fitting character for my dad. Because my dad also wore his adornments on his soul. Thank you. My other honor is introducing our next speaker, his number one grandchild, my daughter Lisa.
Okay, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa. I'm George and Vicky's oldest grandkid. And my family always tells a story about me when I was a toddler. And Grandma would babysit me when my parents were at work and Grandpa was at work. So in my toddler years, I spent a lot more time with Grandma than I did with Grandpa. So one day my dad had hung up a newspaper article about one of Grandpa's achievements, and it had his picture on it. And when I had walked by one day, I pointed at it and said, "Oh, I see him at Grandma's house." And 25, maybe more years later, I'm still hearing about that story all the time. But Grandpa was much more to me than just a guy I saw at Grandma's house. He was one of my first teachers, teaching lessons of the importance of hard work and dedication, no matter what passion we all decided to pursue. He's a role model of kindness and love. He was one of my biggest supporters through all these long years of schooling and long hours. He's the biggest supporter of all of us, my dad, my uncle, my cousins, my brother, and definitely Grandma's biggest fan. He was a great man, a great friend, a brilliant engineer, dedicated professor, but he was the most perfect grandpa. Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce my brother, Phil.
Oh, yeah, beautiful. Very good. Couldn't have been better.
Hello, my name is Phil. I'm the grandson of George, son of Matt, and as my Uncle George would call me, his niece.
Favorite niece.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for their unbelievable support, thoughts, and prayers these past few days. We are truly blessed to have you in our lives. You've made this difficult time into one of terrific memories, stories, and laughs. exactly how my grandpa would want. I was fortunate enough to grow up with my grandparents as a big part of my life. At a young age, I knew I wanted to be just like him. I would constantly imagine what I would be like as an adult and if I would end up like one of my favorite people. Now at the age of 26, I've had some time to reflect on what I've learned from him and what we have in common. I thought this would be an appropriate time to share a few of my favorites. First of all, as all of you know, my grandpa was a calm and respectful man. But he taught me it was okay to let all of that go when the Detroit Tigers bullpen gives up a 3-run home run at the bottom of the ninth inning. We also know how caring and thoughtful he was, always looking to help others. A great way he showed me to help my family was at the dinner table. If someone was too full to finish their meal, he would be the first to offer to help you out and take care of your food for you. I definitely learned that and help out anytime I can in that respect. Lastly, everyone knows that my grandpa was a genius. He was a legendary engineer who paved many roads for his students and colleagues. The man was a thinker, always knowing how to achieve success. This was apparent to me when my cousin Olivia was younger and always wanted to play zoo or restaurant. He would then volunteer to participate as the role of supervisor, where he would then lay on the couch and take a nap. I immediately adopted that concept and took full advantage. All joking aside, I learned so much from my grandpa over the years. He was a true gentleman and role model, leading by example how to be an extraordinary man of faith, family, and friends. Like my dad and uncle, I hope to use what I've learned from my grandpa each day to become more like him, because I've never met a man who truly had an impact on this earth and the people in it like he did. The Kurajian family is ready to help live on his legacy, but unlike the rest of the Kurajian men, I must admit, I just hope to do it with a little more hair in my head. Again, thank you guys for coming, and God bless.
Now you've done it.
Well, I have to move the microphone because I'm a little short. And I think my cousin Phil was still bitter from making him play zoo and restaurants, so he didn't bother to introduce me. But it's okay. I'll forgive you this time. So, good afternoon. My name's Olivia Kurajian. I'm the youngest grandchild of George and Vicki Kurajian. As I begin my speech, I would like to personally thank each and every one of you for coming today to celebrate the life of the most wonderful man I have ever known, my grandpa. There are a million words that I could say about my grandfather, but if I did, we might be sitting here until Friday. In a video interview with my grandparents that I conducted around Christmas time, my grandpa said that if he had just touched one person throughout his life before leaving this earth, he would be satisfied. We all know that he has touched thousands. When I was a little girl, I, like Lisa, played more with Grandma. Grandpa was pleased when he heard me say that he was out of the game, or when I just told him to take a nap. If my dad would come into the room to witness my playtime unfold, he would wake Grandpa up. Grandpa would jokingly say that he was only resting his eyes, certainly not sleeping. I wish that this had been the case today, that Grandpa was just resting his eyes until one of us woke him up. It has been beyond difficult coming to terms with the reality that my role model, mentor, and favorite teacher has made his journey towards the sky. My grandpa always said that death was an acronym for departing earth, ascending towards heaven. He really never looked at anything with a negative lens. When I was making my decision on where to go to university last year, my grandpa truly supported me in whatever decision I was to make. When I chose to attend McGill in Montreal, he was so happy. He didn't focus on the distance I would be from my family, the cost of tuition, sorry Dad, or the difficulty of traveling back and forth, also sorry Dad. He was so proud that I had chosen the school that fit my ambitions for the future. That's who my grandpa was. He weighed each decision with wisdom and acted with the ambiance of courage and with an air of confidence. He was a person whose character we should all try to emulate. During the service yesterday evening, when the scripture was being recited and the derehire or priest was asking God to absolve my grandfather of his sins, I couldn't help but to wonder if he actually had committed any. As far as I was concerned, the only sin he ever committed was not living to be 400 years old. Even then, I wouldn't have had enough time with him. Last night, I slept on the pull-out bed in his home office. Not so comfortable, but it's okay. The walls are covered with his awards and diplomas, but he was never the kind of person to brag. He was the most humble person I have ever known. Although he was immensely proud of his framed recognitions in that room, he knew that there was something more important that defined his success: doing one's best, and the best he did, and the best he was. As I looked around the room last night, I realized that his success was measured by the love that he shared. He adored his family. My grandpa loved his dear wife, my grandmother. He absolutely adored her and was wholeheartedly devoted to her. He loved his kids, and he loved us grandkids. He loved the work that he did and the students that he taught. He loved his country, and he loved his heritage. Everyone who met my grandpa loved him too. His smile was contagious, and his stories were captivating. I'm sure I can speak for all of us here today when I say that people just gravitated towards him. He was someone with welcoming arms, a warm embrace, and knowledge so rich. I wish I could remember more of his stories. He had so many. I know that the details will fade with time, but the impact that he had on my life will never be lessened. The place that he has in my heart is bigger than the ocean. It will remain there forever as his memory and influence on my life will help guide me in life's journey and inspire me to do my best. Grandpa, today I gave you a final head kiss, just like you always would give to me. I miss those, and I will miss you. Thank you.
Lisa, Phil, and Olivia were great. I think they deserve another hand. That's one of the most beautiful tributes I've heard to a grandpa. Thank you very much. Well, they opened it up for you, so any one of you who wishes to come up and share some memories with us, we'll be very happy to have you come. Step right up, please.
Eleanor Ford, and I had the pleasure, the grand pleasure, of having George and Vicki grace my life. I met George nearly 50 years ago, if not 50 years ago, probably 50, Vicki, in the School of Engineering. I was there for 1 year at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. But George embraced me immediately. I was the first person of color on that campus. There was not a maid, a cook, a janitor, no one but me. And how I was told time and time again that I was so different. You're very different. But George embraced me for who and what I am and how my parents raised me and educated me as an individual. I will never forget the love and the faith that he displayed, the gentleman that he was, and will always be in my heart. He not only was respected by the engineers, but he was respected by the entire campus community. Every school and college knew George Kurajian. I had the privilege of moving after my first year of the School of Engineering into the provost's office. And I spent 20 years working for the first provost of the University of Michigan. George always stopped by to say hello. Whenever we had a moment, he'd bring me up to date on Mary and George and Matt. And I saw them grow up. as young people on campus with the same kind of values that I was taught in my home. A home of faith, a home of love, a home of joy, a home of advancement. And we shared so much, we had so much in common. And as I said to George Jr. today, if I know that there are two people who made it into the kingdom, and that's my father, Charles Ford, and George Kurajian. He was consistent. George was consistent in his love for life and for liberty. And one thing that I recall, well, I have many stories about George, but one that he shared with me when we had lunch just before the holidays. And he says, "Oh, Nora, I will never forget what you said at your retirement," which I retired 16 years ago after 41 years of service at the university. He said, "You're retiring from the university, but not from life." And he said, "I'll never forget that. And you have caused me to want to live even longer." And that I always will hold in my heart. I love talking to him on the phone. He was always so happy to hear my voice. When they would go to Florida in the winter, I would make a telephone call at least once a month or so, just to say hello. And he was always so gracious and happy to hear my voice. Sometimes Vicki would share a little bit, but most of the time, "Oh, I just talked to George." And George and I had a truly a deep love affair of faith and love for life. So I say to all of you Kurajians, the grandchildren that I heard many stories about, and the sons and the daughter that I followed their careers and what they were doing in life, you have truly been blessed that we had a George Kurajian in our lives, all of you and me as well. So I say God bless you to Vicki. You know, the memories are great, and we hold them in our hearts, and you will continue to hold them forever. But know that I'm just a phone call away, and you will continue to receive the phone calls from me. God love you all.
Thanks, Dr. Rock.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Devon, student of George Kurajian, and I represent those thousands of students, including Jim Garrett, who sends his best to the families out in California. Ray Begley was here earlier and had to leave. So I've known George for 44 years. He recruited Jim and I at Grand Rapids Junior College, and I wouldn't have gone to Michigan-Dearborn without his enthusiastic encouragement. So when I got there, I am a mechanical engineering graduate, on the undergraduate school. The only notes I've retained are statics ME 360 by Professor Kurajian. They're that thick. I looked at my Michigan-Dearborn file, which is diminished from all the books to about that. I would estimate 95% of it has something to do with George Kurajian. So on the graduate program, I had a few classes from him, but he and Dr. Na and I wrote a graduate thesis for me that was published for ASME. So in his good style, when it was presented at a national conference in Atlanta, I was pushed up to the podium, and I turned around and told him, if I get any questions, are you ready? Because I feel comfortable presenting, but I don't feel comfortable taking questions from these people. And thankfully, they didn't have many or any that I couldn't answer. That was a great event. So let me just read you a little paragraph. He was up for a position at U of M, and I was asked to be a reference for him. Professor Kurajian is simply the best instructor I've ever had, period. Am I making that click, or? I hope not. His intelligence, dedication, effective communication skills, professionalism, and human empathy are all qualities which make him stand out as a professor. I remember him teaching his undergraduate dynamic class twice on a Friday so that students without afternoon classes wouldn't have to wait for the scheduled late afternoon time slot. I was one of those students who had a fiance in Lansing and a home in Grand Rapids, and I wanted to get on the road every Friday afternoon. So he taught it twice. He didn't have to do that. Since that, we celebrated his retirement together. When the scholarship came through, U of M didn't get a whole lot of my money until that, and I would plan to be a continual supporter of that to my level. We had a West Michigan alumni event that he and Vicki attended, and then we've had some lunches. I just decided that of the people in my life, and it's the adults that helped me mature properly, gave me the proper example, it's not much over a handful, and George Kurajian is one of those. I just thought he's too important to me not to see him at least annually. So I've been very blessed. We were at Tony Sacco's, if I pronounce it correctly, and Philip served us. What a, yeah, good job. Did you get a big tip?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then we had a couple at Uptown Parthenon, and I believe Matt was there one time briefly, and George. But he talked a lot, last time I remember his discussion about Olivia going to McGill. So even though some of your grandchildren might not know me, I feel I know you very well, because his kids and his family were a big part of his life. I also read his screenplay, every word. Now I don't think it's called The Bent. I happen to have one on here. It's a Tau Beta Pi Honor Society symbol in a railroad trust. It's titled The Bent. I don't know that that's going to hit Hollywood without any great financial reward, but it sure told me a lot about the life of his father in escaping the genocide and the values that are very near and dear to him, and I'm sure his family. Knowledge is power, Sir Francis Bacon, that was a big one for him. And it wasn't the power of greed and selfishness, it was the power to do good things for other people. Okay, let me read you one last quote, and this is from Teddy Roosevelt, but it's in his papers. This is another thing, food for thought. You probably all have a copy. I said, well, I'll get that to Jim Gearing. She says, no, I'll send him a copy. And of course, it's got his name and address on it and all that. So much, Professor Kurajian. Only those who are fit to live are those who are fit to die. And those who are fit to die are those who have upheld their faith, character, and integrity, and have not shrunk from the duty and responsibility of life. These are the torchbearers. They run with torches until they fall, content if they can pass the torch on in the hands of other runners, into the hands of other runners. He's given me a torch. I'm sure he's given every other one in this room a torch. And the part of him will live in us forever. Thank you.
Thanks.
If there are any others, the mic is still open. Mary?
Yeah.
Oh, fine.
Got laryngitis, but anyway, George and Vicki were one of the finest, kindest people we ever knew. And when we'd get together, we would just have a great time. But there's one story that George repeated every time we saw, and it was like it was the first time we ever heard it. We had a ACYOA, which is Armenian Church Youth Organization, board meeting at my parents' home. And George said, excused himself and said, I don't know whether I left something on at the lab that I have to go turn off. And he had stepped out and left for a little bit and called Vicki for a date. And in those days, you didn't tell anybody you were going with anyone because they had you married off if you went on one date. So the next morning, I talked to Vicki. And we just happened to be talking because I thought he really went to the lab to take care of this problem. And Vicki says, oh, George called me last night for a date. What time was that? Well, it was around this time. So he said, I couldn't even get away with it for one day. But we just laughed every time like it was the first time we ever heard this story. We had so much fun. But they were great people. And Vicki's a great lady that I just love dearly, and just want you to know that.
Well, I think the time has come for our Father to say the final prayer. I'd just like to put a question that was asked of me, put it to rest. Father, did the entire church and committal service today so that all the services are complete. As a result, we're going to the cemetery merely to go and witness the lowering. Thank you, Father, for taking care of all of that for us. If you'll kindly rise now, Father, we'll close with a prayer.
Before I do close with the prayer, I first of all want to commend the grandchildren who have spoken so eloquently. You were the best students of your grandpa, obviously. His passion has traversed from one generation to you. You are the future public speakers that grandpa was. And fear not, you can do it because that thread is in you. You are a Kurajian, and you never forget that. How do we keep George alive? So simply by doing exactly what we've been sharing right now, telling stories, stories that perhaps can fill volumes of books. Each and every single one of you have probably 10, if not more, that you could make part of that volume. That's how the eternity of the soul continues. No one dies. The soul is eternal. That life that God gives to us on this earth, we enjoy, however long or short, as I said in my homily, is this experience. The soul rises to God's glory and his throne in heaven. But that's the mystery of the soul, to be in two places at one time. Here and there, and you celebrate that. And that is the celebration of our Christian faith. George was a great person, great in many achievements, but also great in the simplicity of his life. How tender pictures can be. I advise all of you, go home and look at your pictures, because it has been said one picture is worth 1,000 words. You look at that picture and a flood of memories comes forward, comes back to you, and comes alive. I have a picture, a mental picture of George and Vicki just last summer. I have to share this, Vicki. What do great people do? Yes, they give lectures, they teach, our vocations, we are dressed in, lead us to help people, as George did. There we were at Myers, Grandma, Grandpa, Vicki and George, doing the most simple thing any of you can do, food shopping. How tender it was, and I said to my wife, I said, oh, George and Vicki are back. I didn't realize they had moved back here permanently. So we went over to say hello, welcome back, and it just hit me. I, in my t-shirt and shorts, and